Mark Pomery is taking today's online experience, guys, so buckle up, it's going to be amazing.
Well, hey there, Elevate friends and family. Great to have you with us today for what is actually the fourth and final week of our series, Chasing Happy, where we've been teaching all about how to increase your joy level in everyday life. Here's a question. Have you ever experienced a situation where your joy level kind of instantly plummeted? Like it just, because of something, it went into free fall. You know, it could have been you cruising along, got your favorite playlist going, and someone cuts you off in traffic, boom, joy level instantly plummets. Maybe you've gone to the grocery store, you've got your cart, you've got everything you wanted, maybe even put a couple of bonus treats in there, and you turn around the final aisle to head to the checkout, and there are just lines upon lines upon lines. And you find yourself maybe losing your religion in these moments. Maybe some of you even did the homework that I prescribed last week, which was to make a list of things in your life that you already have access to that bring you joy, and then start doing them once every day. Maybe if you did that, you have already started or were starting to experience your everyday joy level rising, and then pow, one of these things came your way, and in a flash, your joy level came unhinged. But look, here's the reality. It's way easier, let's be honest, to experience joy when things are going as planned, things are going as expected. Really, the challenge is what happens to your joy when things go south? So anyway, so this series, Chasing Happy, we've been drilling into a letter that Paul's like an entrepreneur heavyweight of the early church. He wrote to a church that he'd actually planted 10 years prior in a city called Philippi. And he wrote this letter to them. And he kind of highlighted some spiritual practices that they could do, which we've certainly been learning that we can do here 2,000 years later, to increase their everyday joy. So week one of the big ideas is that God is the source of all joy, and therefore if you want to experience more joy, regularly go to the source. Week two, Paul talked about fixing your thoughts, intentionally fixing your thoughts on things like what is good, what is pure, what is true. And he went on with a longer list than that. And then last week, which is again something that Paul talked about, the secret of contentment. That it's a secret, but he said he's learned it, and that therefore we can learn it too. And little spoiler, it's not a circumstantial secret, it's a spiritual secret. But he peels back the curtain and shows us what that secret is. It's not a secret anymore. Secret's out, everyone. And therefore, if you missed any of those messages, now you can go back and watch them on this platform, or you can take them with you wherever you go in audio form on our podcast. Just go to your favorite podcast app, search for Elevate Church Perth, look, and make it easy for yourself. Follow, subscribe, like, do the things in the app, and so you're not going to miss out on any of the messages each week. Today I want to land this series, Chasing Happy, exactly the same way, focused on exactly the same topic that Paul landed his letter to this church in Philippi, where he ended his letter focusing on generosity. Now, when someone talks about generosity, maybe this just happened to you, it's easy to just default to thinking that generosity is about money. Now, generosity includes money, but to think it only boils down to money is kind of to limit how we can grow in this area of generosity in our life. I mean, look, generosity includes a smile. You can be generous with a smile to a family member, a colleague, a neighbor, someone walking the dog as you're going in the other direction. It's refreshing. You know, we're threatening to release some church merch t-shirts with the phrase, if you're happy and you know it, tell your face. Because expressing joy is an act of generosity. Generosity includes how you talk to and other people, choosing words that are encouraging, choosing words that speak life, and not just maybe like face to face. These days you can layer in ways to be generous with your words by sending someone an encouraging text message, giving them a gift. You know, like really appreciate you. It's not your birthday. There's no occasion. I want you to take this just as a sign of how much I appreciate you. That's an act of generosity. Giving our time. Okay, that's probably a bit more familiar with something that we associate generosity with. Using the gifts that God's entrusted to us, not for our own ends, our own gain, our own selfish ambitions, rather to serve other people, to see God glorified. That's an act of generosity. And yes, absolutely, generosity includes money. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually borrow from a pretty well-trodden preacher's categorization of these sort of big areas, not limited to these, but I'm going to focus on these three areas that preachers for decades have used, and that's time, talents, and treasure. Money, not pirate doubloons. Is that what they're called? Anyway. And the reason I'm separating them out is because the reality is that you and I, we can be actually strong in one of those areas. We're very generous with our time, for example, and yet have significant areas for improvement in maybe one or the other. And so there's an opportunity for us to continue to develop in generosity. And the big idea is, if you want more joy in your life, become more generous. So, for the fourth and final time in this series, if you've got your smartphone camera, scan this flow code. It's going to take you to the exact same chapter of the exact same book that we've been drilling into for this entire series, Philippians chapter 4. Now, while you're doing that, let me remind you or catch you up that Paul wrote this letter while he was actually in Rome under arrest. And we don't know much about that. We don't know much about his circumstances. The reason we don't know much about it is Paul spent almost no time writing about himself. In fact, he spent almost all of this letter writing about Jesus and writing encouragement and instruction to the church. Now, last week we finished the message with one of the most posterized verses in the entire Bible. Philippians 4, verse 13. I can do everything through Christ who gives me strength. You'll see this on the t-shirt, the bumper sticker, the fridge magnet. You'll see some NFL players with that, just Philippians 4:13 under their eyes during the game. Today I want to look at probably one of its closest competitors to one of the most posterized verses in the entire Bible. It's 6 verses later, in verse 19, Paul wrote, "And the same God who takes care of me," remember, he's in prison, "will supply all your needs from his glorious riches, which have been given to us in Christ Jesus." So this first one, verse 13, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. The context there was contentment. I can do all things because it's Christ who gives me strength, not my circumstances. I can have a lot, I can have a little. I can have a full belly, I can have an empty belly. I've learned the secret to be content in all circumstances, and that is to put my faith and get my strength from Jesus. This one, verse 19, "And the same God who takes care of me will supply all your needs from his glorious riches, which have been given to me in Christ Jesus." The context here is Paul actually writing to them, this church in Philippi, thanking them for their generosity, and then just making this statement to them. "My God will supply all of your needs according to his glorious riches." This isn't actually a prayer. Now, I'm not suggesting you don't ever pray this for someone. Maybe you have prayed this for someone. God, I pray that you supply all their needs according to your glorious riches in Christ Jesus. Great. But in this case, Paul wasn't praying that. He was just simply stating a fact. He was stating like, hey, there's something that I know about God, and something that I know about God, how he responds to people's generosity. And because you've been generous, I can confidently say this is what you can expect to come your way. My God will supply all of your needs according to his glorious riches, which have been given to us in Christ Jesus. Paul's actually talking about an eternal principle. Sometimes it's so like watertight that it's referred to as a law that God set in motion, essentially from the beginning of creation. And we call it the principle of sowing and reaping. Now, before I get into that, let me bust one myth. Sometimes this gets misappropriated as karma. You know, if you send good things into the universe, then the universe will send good things back to you. Namaste. This is not that. In fact, as a follower of Jesus, I don't actually believe in this impersonal universe where things just kind of randomly happen. I believe in a God who created the universe and who is intensely interested in the people he created to be a part of that universe, and that he actually acts in response to our generosity, the principle of sowing and reaping. Now, it's 2023. This is an agricultural term. Some of you, unlike me, have yet to discover the joys of urban farming. And so I talk about sowing and reaping. I can't assume you'll know what I'm talking about, because you get your fruit and veg from the supermarket. It's just reaping. There's no sowing. Well, you have to pay for it. Anyway. Captain Obvious, resident urban farmer, Mark Pomeroy, defines sowing and reaping this way, as does everyone who's ever grown anything. And that is that you reap what you sow. You harvest. You get a return on what you first planted, what you first sow. What you sow, that's what you grow. If you plant or sow tomato seeds, you get tomatoes. There's no mystery. You don't have to pray. You just care for the tomato seeds, care for the plants, and you will get tomato seeds. Not pumpkin seeds, not watermelon. And this principle actually works both ways in life. It works positively. You know, if you sow generosity, you reap generosity. That's what we're going to talk about today. But just a little warning, it also works in the negative. Like if you sow gossip and bitterness, you're going to reap gossip and bitterness. If you sow unforgiveness because you want vengeance and you're praying, your prayers are God get them rather than God release me from the hurt, then you're going to reap unforgiveness. And then the quantity comes into play. It's not just like the quality or the nature of what you sow, it's also the quantity. I've still got my Captain Obvious hat on, so let me say this. If you plant or sow 0 tomato seeds, then don't bother walking into your backyard every morning looking for how your tomatoes are going, because there won't be any. Okay? Sow nothing, reap nothing. Sow a little, reap a little. Sow an abundance, you can expect. It's not mysterious. You don't have to pray. You can expect to reap an abundance. So that's verse 19. Let me back it up. Starting in verse 15. This is Paul writing this letter to the church in Philippi, as you know, you Philippians were the only ones who gave me financial help when I first brought you the good news and then traveled on from Macedonia. No other church did this. Even when I was in Thessalonica, you sent help more than once. I don't say this because I wanted a gift from you. Rather, I want you to receive a reward for your kindness. Paul just keeps highlighting the fact that they were generous and generous and generous and generous again and again and again and again. Two things. First of all, I want us to be like the church in Philippi, not like those other churches. To be known for our generosity, that when people look across the landscape, and I'm not throwing any other church under the bus, not sure Paul was either. He was just drawing a contrast to this standout faith expressed in generosity that came from the church in Philippi. And then he just says, look, you will receive a reward for your kindness. This word reward, in the context that Paul's using it, is literally a business term. It's like you will receive a return on your investment. And again, this just comes back to Paul knowing that God is a father who likes to reward his kids, and that this principle of sowing and reaping, it doesn't have a finish line. You keep sowing, you'll keep reaping. You sow more, you'll reap more. Be those people. Be that church. That's us. Now, I want to take us over to something that Jesus said. And I'm going to fold this in because Jesus referenced this principle of sowing and reaping, and actually he gave a little cheat code that I want to show you today. So again, Jesus was also speaking to an agricultural society. So this is what he said to them. Given you will receive. There it is. The principle of sowing and reaping. Not given you might receive, given you will receive. Your gift will return to you in full, pressed down, shaken together to make room for more, running over and poured into your lap. The amount you give will determine the amount you get back. Now, I'm going to leave that on the screen, and the audience that he would have spoken this to wouldn't have required any explanation, but we do, and let me give you that very simple explanation. They were an agricultural society, predominantly sort of grain-based, think wheat as the prime example, and there was no John Deere combine harvesters around. It was all done manually. And so people would take empty baskets out into the fields, and they would pick the heads of wheat, they would put them in the baskets, then they would take that basket to like the weigh station or the guy that would pay you for what you collected. So that would be sort of weighed and measured, and then you would be paid based on the weight and the measure of what you'd brought from the harvest. Basically, in very general terms, there was two types of people that would be involved in the harvest when Jesus was making this statement. The first group were ones that were like, this is hard. This is hard work. This basket, the more I put in, the heavier it gets, the harder it is to pick up, to carry, the harder it is to take over to the weigh station. So what those people would do, they would just sort of fluff the wheat into the basket, and it would be kind of full, maybe half full, 2/3 full. It would be a bit loosey-goosey, lots of air pockets in there. And they would then take that to the weigh station, and it would be weighed, and they would get paid according to what they had given. And then Jesus is making the contrast that there's another group of people that were involved in the same harvest, typically, and they would have their basket, and they would put wheat in it, and they would start pressing it down. They would shake it together to get the air pockets out to make room for more. then they would just keep adding to it and adding to it to the point, pressed down, shaken together, pressed down, shaken together, eventually running over, at which time they were like, okay, there's not any room for more. This is at max capacity. And they would lug that thing to the weigh station. It took more time, it took more effort, it took more sacrifice. But here's the difference. They got paid more. They positioned themselves to get a greater reward. The amount you give will determine the amount you get back. Now, Jesus literally backed this onto talking about if you judge other people, you'll get judgment in return. So that was like the lead-in sentence. But the reality is this principle applies to all aspects of our lives, including the three that I'm focusing on today: time, talents, and treasure. Now, like the harvesters, sometimes you'll reap money. Great. I mean, most of us like that idea. Yet, not always. It's up to God to determine how He will reward you, but the promise is that He will reward you. The confidence is that He will reward you, and sometimes He rewards us with things that money can't buy. Things like joy, more love, more peace, and the list goes on. And look, for my wife Louisa and I, the fact is that joy is way up there as something that we continually experience coming our way, coming back to us as a reward for us being generous. Right off the bat, we experience a joy inherently by simply, consistently living with open hands and open hearts. There's like a freedom that we experience with that. Open hearts, open hands, knowing and trusting, not even wishing, we know this is true, that God will supply all of our needs according to His glorious riches. And if you're not there, then what tends to happen is you tend to live in fear. You tend to live with what's referred to as a scarcity mentality. You're always worried that if I let go, if I open my hands, if I open my heart, what if I run out? And so because you live with that fear, and you might call it something else, frugality, wisdom, too often it's fear. Too often it's a scarcity mentality, and you don't experience joy and peace living with that mentality. Instead, the freedom and the joy comes when you start living with an abundance mentality. When you've landed on the truth that because God will never run out, you'll never run out, and we'll never run out. My God will supply all of your needs according to His riches, His glorious riches, which are given to us in Christ Jesus. If you're generous, that's the reward you and I can expect. Look, we experience joy when we see marriages strengthened, marriages restored, because of what God's doing in and through Elevate Church. We experience joy because our generosity has played a part in making that story a reality. We experience great joy when we see anxiety and depression lifted off people because of God at work in and through Elevate Church, because we know that our generosity, that our giving played a part in making that story possible. When we see people's leadership capacity growing, when we see people being healed, when we see people getting baptized, all of these things, God at work, we experience great joy because we know that upstream we got to play a part by sowing into Elevate Church. So I'm just going to drop one final practical step that you can take to experience more joy, the rewards that Paul so confidently double-clicked on. and you will fall into one of these three categories. I'm going to give three categories, and they literally cover everybody, okay? Maybe you're someone who has never actually given financially. And remember, we're not just talking about money, but I just want to kind of get specific. Something you can do very tangibly, very practically. Don't limit it to this, but don't go past this without considering taking a step. If you've never given, then maybe take your first step. No judgment. We don't know. We don't track. We don't keep like a list who's given, who hasn't. But maybe take a first step and whatever that looks like, even if it's a baby step, like get in the game. Second category, you might be someone who used to give. Maybe you gave to your last church. Maybe you gave previously and then you went through a turbulent season and you kind of pulled back on your giving. Maybe get back into the game. So, the first group, you've never given, get in the game. The second group, you used to give, get back in the game. And then this third group, you are already giving. You're consistently giving. Well, I want to encourage you to consider taking a next step with your giving. Like getting your basket and putting more in and pressing it down and shaking it together and doing a little bit more of the hard work, positioning yourself with a bit more sacrifice, but ultimately positioning yourself for getting a greater reward. I'm not talking about God's a vending machine. I'm not talking about the so-called prosperity gospel. I'm merely talking about, because again, I said sometimes the reward comes, it's not money, it's things that money can't buy, but that's up to God. But we can be the sort of people who commit to living more generously because we trust and know a God who's a good father and who likes giving good things to his kids. The ways to give, they're on the screen. No matter where you are in the world, you can use these two ways, our Elevate Church website, or download our Elevate Church AU app and just get it in. It's 2023, people. Electronic. Hello. So well done in advance. I'm just going to work on the assumption that God is speaking to you. You'll respond